I think it is quite impressive.
Without much ado, let me start with my first question. I will start with you, Dr. Dikbeolu. The rest of the world right now, we see what's happening with the rest of the world in terms of trade wars, trade tension, protectionism. We see what President Donald Trump is doing right now. America first, and perhaps the rest of the world should go and stay somewhere. Is this really a smart move for Africa in the opposite direction? Doctor?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Nancy. And thank you for inviting me to participate on this panel on behalf of the Minister of Finance. You know, your question reminds me of the grilling you used to give me on Moneyline on the AIT television. But this time around, I think the answers are more readily available. The candid truth is that I think it's a good thing that Africa is pulling together at the time that the rest of the world seems to be pulling apart. And really, this is for a variety of reasons. The first is that history has shown us that regional integration has helped transform several parts of the world, and you made reference to the European Union, but even the ASEAN countries have also used regional integration to push their development. But the real reason why it's a good thing is that there are benefits to be had from having a larger continental market, as it were. I mean, for instance, we all know that just by having a larger market, you can benefit from the economies of scale that exist. Also relevant is the fact that you can have increased cross-border investments, in the sense that African businesses can now begin to feel that that the whole continent is their marketplace rather than their individual countries. But even interestingly enough, foreign direct investment will take a cue from the fact that you have a single market, because it means entry into any part of that market to naturally translate into your ability to benefit from that wider market. I would just say that there's the discussion that it's the biggest single market in the world. I think maybe by number of participating countries, if Africa were one economy, it would actually be the 8th largest economy in the world after the US, China, Japan, Germany, and such like. I think it would just come in just after Italy. So the point being that yes, it will be a large market, but you would agree with me, of course, that there's a lot of way to go before we achieve all those benefits. But I think yes, it's a good thing. There are benefits to be had. Of course, there are challenges, but I'm sure you will talk about those later on. Thank you very much.
Question of African unity, having the single market, $3 trillion worth GDP. How smart are we this time? Is the timing right?
Thank you, Nancy. On behalf of the African Union, let me first of all express our delight at what is happening here today. This is the way to go for people to integrate our policies and the project. So specifically to answer your question, at a time when trade war reigns supreme in the developed world, and the WTO negotiations are not moving an inch, it's certainly good news that Africa is putting together the Continental Free Trade Agreement. But what we should remember ourselves is that this is not a new concept. I mean, like the ambassador of Kenya remarked, it's tied to efforts to align to the continental unity, right from the Lagos Plan of Action and Abuja Plan of Action. After it's just an attempt to fast-track it. I think certainly the question is yes, this is the way to go. If you consider where Africa is currently, we have a situation whereby our share of global trade has declined from around 3% in the 1970s. It is currently about 2.67%, the last time I checked. That was in 2007, statistics available. So also, we have a situation whereby most economies, what they do is simply to export unprocessed products.
So if we can do well with our regional bodies, how are we going to do well with the Continental Free Trade Area?
Thank you so much. Actually, I wanted to bring this subject because it's quite important. The most important thing here that we have a continental free trade agreement, but I think we need to give a little bit stop to think about the evaluation of the performance of these regional economic blocks. As you said, if they're not performing enough, they're not impacting the daily lives of Africans, what role could they play in continental free trade agreement in order to avoid future Brexits, within the continent? This is first, and I think it needs not a political will, but I think it needs a political courage and a lot of negotiations in order, to promote, a free trade agreement, intra-regional trade. And I think also there's one key thing that I wanted to bring here is the business actors. Do they know about the free trade agreement? I'm sure there are a lot of actors who have no mere knowledge about the opportunities and about the challenges of the free trade agreement. So what are the measures that are done at the procedural level, at the administrative level, at the technical level to accompany African investors in order to implement this free trade agreement?
Now let me bring in Mr. Taylor, European Union. What lessons can the Continental Free Trade Area learn from the European Union, especially with Brexit going out? We've seen what's been happening since they voted to stay out of the European Union. So many challenges. Perhaps sometimes when I reflect, I say, oh, if they had told the British people that this will happen, or if they have another referendum tomorrow, they may say, no, leave us there. But I'm not from the UK, so I don't know. So you give us your own perspectives.
Thank you, Nancy. One of the speakers doing goodwill messages earlier here this morning said that until the lion tells his story, the story will always be told by the hunter. I think he was speaking to me. So I'm not going to tell you what lessons you should learn, all right? I think you have very distinguished speakers and guests here from the African Union and so on. I think you will learn your own lessons. What I can share with you is some of the experiences that we have seen in the European Union, and from that you will draw your own conclusions. But let's start with Brexit. It's a mess. It's also a proof that if you don't bring everybody along in the journey with you, there will be people that will be dissatisfied, and they will even shoot themselves in the feet because they're unhappy. I don't think anybody now that follows the Brexit story can really see what the advantage is for the majority of the people in Britain from leaving a very well-established trading pattern. But it's so ingrained in there now that the decisions are taken which will have an impact. We've seen in the press here in Nigeria that there will be an economic impact here. That may be exaggerated from the media, but we know even within the EU that investors, they like stability. And when you have an unstable situation like the Brexit talks, it leads to disturbances of the market, and that has a negative impact eventually on the economy. And that will be felt even as far away as Nigeria. And when people talk about the consequences of Brexit here, my personal belief is that it will not have such an impact on a country like Nigeria in terms of its trade with Europe. But there are other countries in Africa that have preferential trade agreements, our famous economic partnership agreements, where that trade will be affected enormously. Where you have countries, for example in Southern Africa, that send most of their exports to Europe via the UK, from day to day, if there is a no-deal Brexit, that preferential trade pattern will be cut off, and that has enormous consequences. Now, what does that say for the African free trade area? It shows that if you don't have a preferential trade regime, trade is much more difficult. And when you establish a successful trading regime, it really links everybody very closely together. And the whole problem of Brexit, in fact, is how to unravel that relationship in a sensible way. And I think there, it's not necessarily a lesson for you, but it is certainly something that your heads of state and your negotiators really need to take on board. How far are you prepared to close up your relationship? How far are you prepared to give up sovereignty to build that trading relationship? I think in Nigeria, there is a very open debate about that. Whether it's trade relations with the EU or within ECOWAS or at the level of the African Union. But there's no free dinner here. If you want a preferential trade regime which will have overall a positive benefit for the economies of the African states, there is a price to pay, and that starts off with your own sovereignty. But that's a whole other area of discussion. Thank you.
Senator Shehu Sani, what do you have to say? Especially you that have the CSO's background. And I also do know that even as we pursue after, it also has to be domesticated. Our national assemblies or our parliaments would need to work on it. Do you think that perhaps, because I've also heard different thoughts from different divides. No, we don't support after. For example, I was speaking with a senator, was it 2 weeks ago? Nancy, how can you be supporting this? I said, Senator, I'm not one of the leaders that went to do the stuff. He was of the view, no, you see what is happening? Nigeria may just be the Brexit for after. So it got me thinking that perhaps, do we have everyone on board, especially from the parliament and also the CSOs, which you were part of before you entered the Nigerian Senate?
Thank you very much. I think what we need to remind ourselves is that the idea of integrating the continent economically is not a new one. It is imbibed in the articles and clauses and writings and statements of our founding fathers in Africa. We go through the writings and speeches of the Haile Selassie, Kwame Nkrumah, Nnamdi Azikiwe, Ahmed Sekou Toure. You can see how they succinctly predicted that our future as a continent is tied to each other. So the idea of an African free trade area came after we have come to the realization that all that we have attempted to do in the last 5 decades have failed. In the last 5 decades, we have seen how we struggle to find our footings and future by relationships that are outside of the continent. We tried our marriages with the IMF, it failed. With the World Bank, it failed. And some of our Francophone allies, too, aligned themselves with France, thinking that all will deliver them to the future they so desire. So the idea of an African free trade area is coming back to that very reality, that our destiny and our future is tied to each other. But there are challenges that we have to be ready to face, one of which is the one we are experiencing in the country today. You can't sign an African free trade area and then close your borders. I don't know how to call black white, that is my own. Of building a new economic future for our continent, then we have to sacrifice some of our irrelevant relationships with nations that are outside of our continent. And on this, I believe that signing is one thing, and following to the latter, all the requisites of those papers we sign is another. So I believe a conversation like this will ignite and encourage those who are empowered with the levers of power to see to it that those things we have signed on paper come to life. Thank you.